Okay, it's 11 o'clock. We can start our webinar. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here, for joining us for this conversation on cohesion reform, the reform of the cohesion policy of the European Union and the enlargement policy of the European Union. This seminar is co-organized by OBCT and our partner Sole 24 Ore, that I thank for this cooperation in the event. And this is done in the framework of the project Energy for Future, which is co-financed by the European Union. The topic of today is precisely connecting these two policies. Cohesion policy, as you know, is the tool for promoting economic growth and social welfare, stimulating less developed regions at European level. On the other side, we have enlargement policy, the policy that currently applies to countries that aspire to join the European Union. Today we speak about 9 countries, 6 in the Western Balkans, plus 3 of the post-Soviet area, which are Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. The two policies discussed together the reason why we discuss them is around the preparation of the new multi-annual financial framework of the European Union. And the discussion that is taking place is pushed forward by a number of think tanks at European level that want to suggest the importance of start preparing candidate countries, the future members, to the rules of the cohesion policy, which are very specific and which don't apply to them when they are involved in the accession process. And on the other side, consider that including them in the policy, including them in the cohesion policy, it would be a sign that we're really serious about the enlargement process, because it would allow to increase substantially the resources devoted to them. The enlargement policy lives a period of new optimism recently. There is more engagement in the discussion since Ukraine in particular has been considered a candidate country, basically after the catastrophic invasion of Russia, as a response to that. But the idea is that it is important to work for gradual integration of the candidate countries in a different way than in the past. We've experienced that the previous enlargement process showed the importance of preparing for cohesion, or the other way around, that the previous enlargement did not prepare the countries for cohesion, therefore they lost time once they became member states. I am Luisa Chiodi. I am the director of Osservatorio Balcani, Caucaso, Transeuropa, OBCT, and I'm very, very happy to introduce my guest speakers that in different capacities worked on these issues and will allow us to understand better what we are talking about. And in particular, I'm happy to introduce you to Krisela Hackaj, Executive Director of the think tank Cooperation and Development Institute in Tirana, and Thomas Schwab from Postel, that is a senior expert of the Bertelsmann Stiftung. So welcome here. Thank you for joining. I'll start by giving this floor to Krisela, asking her to introduce us to the topic, to explain us why it is so important to discuss the connection between the two, and why your institute has been so active in advocating this early inclusion in the cohesion policies of candidate countries. Krisela, the floor is yours.
That's Luisa. Thank you, Luisa. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to join this webinar. For us, it's the topic which is at the heart of the webinar. It's very much on our table on a daily basis, basically. As you said, rightly so, the previous enlargement didn't prepare the future member state with the other policies, in particular with the cohesion policy. So that's why we think that it's very relevant to start already while you are preparing for membership to learn how the other policies, EU policies of the EU work, what are their benefits, what is their impact. And we should do this now before, of course, membership. Few words about CDI. We are based in Tirana, as you mentioned. We work on regional cooperation, connectivity, and of course, enlargement. Those are our, let's say, main areas of work. I will try to bring here some insights or some perspectives from, of course, an aspiring member state, so candidate country, Albania now. Which might be useful for of course, for the audience, but hopefully also for the future discussion that will follow at member state, especially at member state level when it comes to preparing for the future EU policies and for the next multi-annual financial framework. I will focus on the current enlargement toolbox that we have in place, basically, for the Western Balkan 6, because rightly so you mentioned that there are also, we are now 9, of course, aspiring member states, candidate countries to aspire to be member states, but I will focus on the Western Balkan region because, of course, that I know better. According to the study of EBRD, the countries from the regions of Western Balkan 6 will need 70 years to fully converge with EU. 70 years. Those are the calculations that they have done. As you mentioned, there is the Russian aggression to Ukraine, so we have an unprecedented geopolitical context, which is very relevant in nowadays. The region is facing an unprecedented outward migration, and I think those two elements combined together should prepare the ground for the top priority, which should be in the table of the policymakers, creating the right development conditions in our region. Although the enlargement policy was somehow reformed back in 2020 with a new enlargement methodology, in the current situation that I shortly described with the two, let's say, main aspects, like the geopolitical context, but also the migration that we face, is not designed to achieve convergence. And it does not have also the financial, let's say, muscle to support convergence in a fast, let's say, way. So to support the development needs that we have. By design, the current enlargement toolbox is based on top-down instruments. For the moment, we have 2 instruments in the table, so that are implemented in our region. The first one is IPA, the Instrument for Accession, which is now in the 3rd edition. We have IPA 3 currently being implemented. And we have a second one, which was introduced end of last year and still to be, let's say, put under implementation, which is the Reform and Growth Facility, or the so-called growth plan that was announced by the Commission last year. Both top-down instruments mostly focus on support for infrastructure, but also democratic reform programs, and less to our view, based on our research and based, of course, on the experience on the ground, less focus on the social and economic and territorial development of the candidate countries. We in CDI promote, and you mentioned it briefly, Luisa, this accession before memberships, this accession to, let's say, EU policies before we actually become members, so as to start learning, to start familiarizing with those policies, to start understanding how they work, what are the benefits, what is the impact, what are the pros and the cons of those policies, to start, let's say, having within our societies the needed skills for them to implement that as fully, with full rights, basically. We think that this approach, and we have been working on it since now some years, can speed up enlargement as well. We have identified some deficiencies of the current enlargement toolbox, which I mentioned before. It's based on those 2 instruments. Both instruments do not ensure the societal, let's say, or do not ensure, let's say, fully as we wish, societal ownership. They are top-down, I mentioned, and their programming cycle does not involve partnership, which is a very important element of the cohesion policy, of the EU's cohesion policy. when I say partnership, is partnership, of course, with local and regional authorities, businesses, civil society organization, youth, etc. Both are project-based and reform-based, but they do not have as mainstream the development criteria. What I was mentioning in the very beginning, meeting the development needs that our region has. Those development criteria are largely missing in the way those two instruments work. On their governance, because also governance of instruments is also very important. That's why we are looking forward with the growth plan to understand a bit more on how the EU-based instruments work in practice. And we have in the growth plan a kind of mirror of the recovery and resilience facility, which is already being implemented in the member state. With the growth plan, we hope that some of the novelties that have been introduced when it comes to the governance, meaning some more, let's say, participation from the civil society sector in the monitoring committee, but also some innovative tools, such as, for example, the scoreboard, can provide for those, let's say, big gaps that we have under IPA, that inclusivity and that let's say, more accountability that we don't have, for example, in IPA. We hope that, of course, if properly implemented those novelties, because we have still to see with the growth plan, is still under, yet to be implemented. If they are properly implemented, of course, we hope to have some good governance impact in our public administration, so that they can become more let's say, skilled when it comes to implement those funding. We discussed during our flagship yearly event called Tirana Connectivity Forum, which was a couple of days before. Of course, this accession before membership, and the way we see it is to, and it's also somehow the rationale also of the growth plan, because what is the growth plan aiming for? It's a gradual access of the markets of the Western Balkan region into the EU's single market. So starting for the citizens of the Western Balkan regions to feel the benefits of the EU before they join, of course, the EU family. Now, we think that this should be expanded, not just the single market policy, but also the cohesion policy. And why that? Because, of course, when you open the markets, you need some also accompanying measures to support for the possible and eventual negative externalities that you have when you open the markets of your country. We think that being covered by and having access to EU's cohesion policy, but also to other sectoral policies, this definitely would dramatize enlargement, because it seems that, well, you mentioned there is a good positive momentum now. We hope will stay like that, but this is not taken for granted. Basically, we have to work on de-dramatizing enlargement and work on it to be like a feasible project. It also would recognize, let's say, de facto integration of the South Europe 6 countries into the EU's economic system. Will, of course, address more the development needs that are currently not addressed by the IPA, by the enlargement policy, because we need more and more engagement also with the other line DGs that are working on specific sectoral policies in the EU. And this is not new for the region, actually, because we had IPA 1, the first edition of the instrument for pre-accession, where we could work, our public administration in the region could work with the different line DGs, DG Regio, DG Agri, and other DGs. So there is already some experience in the region where this can be as well, of course, developed further and adapted, of course, to the current situation of the EU, but also on our end. And lastly, but it's also very important to offer to address that feature that I mentioned at the very beginning, the migration, which is very high, to address, of course, that particular concern of our countries, and offer tangible and immediate benefits to the citizens. And to this end, in this framework, we think that this discussion on the pre-enlargement policy, that it's started, but of course will take a more, let's say, higher and intensive, so to say, dynamic in the next year, and of course 2026, to provide a window of opportunity to update, but also upgrade the relationship between the EU and the candidate countries. Because as it is right now, it's not where it should be. And we think that within that window of opportunity of discussing these policies, we can actually suggest concrete ideas on how this can be improved. The growth plan for the region, I mentioned before, is allowing our economies to have an early and gradual access to the single market. But I mentioned also that with this opening of the market, we have also externalities. So while conditionality is very strong in the growth plan, it's of course important, and we should also see how it will work in practice and how the Commission will work on the different conditions that is put with the growth plan. We need also solidarity. We need also partnership principle. We need also to take all the societal actors on board when we work together, not just the governments themselves, but we need also the other part of the society to benefit also during the implementation, during let's say transformational process that occurs when you prepare for membership. So we need a good governance element, which is very relevant, and not just at central level, which normally is the case with IPA, but we need it at every level of our public administration, local, region, but of course at central as well. We need the solidarity that comes with the cohesion policies. We need, of course, the partnership, more focus on human capital, because this is not the case with the current instruments, and we need more focus on the economic and social and territorial cohesion in our region. So to conclude, we think there is an opportunity, a window of opportunity with the discussion that is taking place now, and will of course be more intensely in the coming years to implement this accession before membership, to starting to, as you mentioned rightly, so Luisa, to start preparing the cohesion ecosystem in our countries, to prepare. We need to include already the candidate countries in those discussions. Now that the screening, for example, Albania, I'm taking here Albania and North Macedonia because Serbia and Montenegro are already negotiated. But now that our screening process, the bilateral meetings with the Commission for all the clusters has finished, I don't see any impediment on why not having dialogue structures already in place for the different clusters, and here also for the cluster that includes cohesion policy. And we have already experience on the ground. We are somehow not somehow, but we are benefiting already, but some of the cohesion instruments that are existing, like Interreg, like macro-regional strategies, and there is already some very good practice and experience on the ground that can be used to understand what's the situation, how are the authorities prepared, and what should be changed, of course, to upgrade this participation of the societal actors into other, let's say, instruments of the cohesion policy, not just the two that I mentioned now in the very end, because we think that it's time now to expand that access to the toolbox. And I'll stop here, but of course we'll have time to delve more maybe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Krisela, for introducing the whole discussion, the whole package of the discussion around these two poles that we want to put together. And we'll have a second round, and hopefully for the audience, if you have questions after we've heard the first introduction by Thomas Schwab from Postel, maybe you also want to prepare your questions. Thomas, you are a senior expert at Bertelsmann Stiftung, and you've been working a lot on the same issue. I'd like to have your perspective, which of course is, we've heard the perspective from the candidate countries in the Western Balkans. From the EU, the angle somehow changes slightly, also because we are discussing about resources that might be where actors might be in competition for. And by the way, the reform of the multi-annual financial framework, of course, has a lot of tension, because many are the issues where resources are needed, from fight against climate change to the growth of the defense industry that the EU is trying to do. So how likely is that this debate we are pushing forward goes in the right direction, and what is the perspective from the EU? The floor is yours.
Okay, so hi, I'm Thomas. Thank you for having me here. Difficult question, because if we are talking about what's going on at the moment, it's a little bit difficult to get an overview. But to start with, as you already pointed out, we have additional policy issues to resolve. So talking about the European level, we now have the new, soon new Commission. We have a new commissioner for defense for the first time, for example. So this makes already a statement that this will be definitely a policy priority, and it's urgent as we see it in the context of Ukraine. We know that the Green Deal, the transformation to a green climate neutral economy is not really on track yet. So there are huge gaps in spending. We are talking about 300 to 600 billions per year needed to make this work until 2030 already. We have issues in terms of competitiveness, productivity. Just 2 weeks ago, Mario Draghi released his report on the future of competitiveness, and was quite a compelling piece of evidence, and still is to be discussed, that we are lagging behind. We are declining in terms of productivity. We are falling behind in terms of competitiveness as a continent, if you compare it with China and the US. We have demographic issues, in particular in the EU27. Which will also worsen in the coming years with the baby boomers getting retired. So there are many additional issues to solve, and all these need attention, but they need also money. And at the moment, it's high time in many facets. So first of all, we are getting a new commission. We are probably facing a clean industrial deal, a Green Deal 2.0, where we want to really achieve the goals outlined by the Green Deal. We will see actions in terms of defense, in terms of demography, in terms of competitiveness, and so on and so forth. All this will be openly released in the next coming months. So maybe already before Christmas, we get a notification about the Clean Industrial Deal. There are a lot of rumors involved, but to be honest, nobody really knows the details. And the second thing, and this is more important, coming to how cohesion policy, how other instruments for accession will develop, is the question of the multi-annual financial framework. Next year, probably May, maybe in fall. It depends on German elections, as some said in Brussels. But we will start a very intense discussion about financial priorities. Where to spend the money, how much money to spend, where can we collect or ramp up additional funds. Because at the moment, we have a budget of about 200 billion euros per year. That may sound quite like something, but in the end, it isn't. So 200 billion euro per year, that's the budget a small country called Austria has per year. 9 million inhabitants. I mean, that's the full-fledged budget for this country, sure, but 200 billion euro per year for 450 billion people. So there's a mismatch in there, and we will have very intense discussions on how to spend the money, how much money should go into cohesion, how much money we can afford for rebuild Ukraine, but also for enlargement purposes. We will also have a debate, and this is also what Krisela touched on the delivery model. So it's also the question how much top-down approach we will have and how integrated these funds will be dispersed. And I think that's one thing which is already quite clear, that we will have to use the funds very wisely, meaning that ideally there are two things or three things to be achieved at the same time. So if we are spending money for cohesion, it should ideally also contribute to countering climate change and or defense. And I think that's the line of thinking and discussions we will have starting next year, and this will last probably until 2027. So I promise you that this time discussions about the MFF will be the longest and the most intense we've ever had in Europe so far.
Indeed. And what about the perspective? I'm, as you took very effectively the question I address you, I'd like to add the second part, which is your view of this drive to include new member states in the cohesion, new members, sorry, which the candidate countries in the cohesion, and how much this can adjust to these new top-down instruments that were described before, in particular, considering that recently there was these additional resources put on the table by the growth plan. So somehow the countries should be already, the candidate countries should be already happy about what they have on the table. But still, I mean, those are instruments that are very different from cohesion. So how do you see it from the EU perspective?
So I think, so as I just outlined, I think the perspectives for funding streams in general not the best, but I think in the debate, and I mean, I'm an economist, I would always argue if you have a good argument why this makes sense to spend the money in this or that direction, in that case enlargement, and why it is superior to spend it instead of spending it somewhere else, you have a point. To be more specific, if you're, so why do we want to have cohesion policy here in the enlargement process? It's about, first of all, preparing for the enlargement process, right? To really allow this participation in this economic, but also social network, which basically stands behind the single market. And then it's the question of what can investments in that regard do? And I think there can be done quite a lot. Because first of all, there is, as Krisela also outlined, there's a need to prepare, because we see also within the EU27 a huge fragmentation. So not everyone participates in the same way, and also not everyone was prepared correctly. So if you spend the money wisely now, it's probably better than preparing afterwards. So I think there's a very good argument in really ensuring that the structures in economic fabric and social fabric and in governance are such that the new
Sorry, yeah. Sorry,
that that the new member states get the most out of it. And in the end, it's also a question of marginal return. If you are on a lower level of economic development, you can achieve in relation substantially more than some regions which are already at the frontier where you only have tiny steps to move forwards. So if you invest €1 in addition in a region which is already at the frontier, you get out less than leveraging up regions at a lower level.
Okay. If anyone of the audience wants to ask question, please either open your microphone or write in the chat, and I'll be happy to read out the question you want to ask. I return to Krisela. You mentioned at the point these some experiences, some good practices that we already experienced with the little money of the Interreg program. Can you elaborate a bit on that? What do we know from the Interreg that could be useful to advocate once again for the inclusion in the cohesion?
Thank you, Luisa, for the question. What we would love to see is to have more impact studies in general when it comes to EU funding that comes in our countries. Normally we have audits of those funding, which brings some, of course, elements for assessment, but not like the full picture of the impact that it's created on the ground. I will just like to make one concrete example, what we actually did, CDI did. We used one of the Interreg programs where Albania is participating to lobby in the European Parliament for the inclusion of Corridor 8 in at the time it was a draft regulation for the TEN-T, the Trans-European Network corridors. And this was done through this program. Now we have already an adopted regulation, and we have a new corridor included in the TEN-T map of corridors, which is the West Balkan corridor, which at the beginning wasn't including Corridor 8, and now is including Corridor 8. For those that don't know, Corridor 8, it's the one that links South Italy, so it's Puglia, in Italy, to the Black Sea in Bulgaria. So crosses Albania and North Macedonia, and then finishes in the Black Sea. Now, this is a very concrete example of what you can do to advance connectivity of our region, also through these instruments, which are not maybe fitting for that purpose, because you have other instruments that could also allow our countries to align their transport, let's say, policies, etc., etc. But in the, let's say, picture of instruments that we have to be smart in using those available ones to the benefit of our EU integration agenda. Now, we have, of course, issues when it comes to absorption capacities, and we have to work hard there. It's a learning process. As you mentioned, countries that enter the EU had problems in absorbing cohesion policy after they became member state. And I think it was also mentioned in our forum, I think the case of Romania, which could only absorb about 10% of the cohesion, let's say, funding that was coming to that country after becoming a member state. So, of course, we are not, for the moment, prepared to have a full access, and this is not what we are advocating for. What we are advocating is to have access to, let's say, certain funding that goes for development, which has not to be anymore implemented as IPA works. For example, the earmarked budget under IPA that goes for development can be implemented under the principle of cohesion policy. And this goes, I mean, brings me back to the way IPA 1, for example, was and I mentioned this in the very beginning. Work with the line DGs that on a daily basis do engage with our institutions on the very, let's say, development, let's say, policies that we have. We can do this. We are not ready to, of course, have access to the full toolbox of instruments under the cohesion policy. They are huge, they are very complex, we are not ready there. But what we can do is so to say, part of the money that goes for enlargement purposes, for enlargement project, to be implemented under the principle of the cohesion policy, and to be implemented, whatever will be like the final, let's say, scenario of how cohesion policy would look like after 2027. We think that it's better to have it like in a reformed, let's say, picture than we have it right now. And also to add one more element, Jorge is not here for this event, but at CPMR, they have conducted this study on the scenarios of cohesion policy with enlargement in 2030, with no enlargement at all, or with full enlargement, let's say, there are different scenarios that they have forecasted. And if a first enlargement occurs, they say in their study, the study is called, just to go to the name, the Furthering Cohesion in Enlarged Europe. It's been issued by CPMR in April 2024, so this year, okay? And they mentioned that the difference of in the average of let's say funding that goes for an inhabitant in the EU, if an enlargement occurs, so is happening within 2030, it's €4 with the current formula of the cohesion of how cohesion policy is for the moment being calculated. So without taking into account any changes in the calculation of the formula of the distribution of the cohesion funding for the member state. Of course, the discussion will show whether they will go for, of course, changing the rules and everything. But if no changes at all occurs in the rules of calculation of the cohesion policy distribution, only €4 less will go to an EU citizen if there is an enlargement by 2030. This is the study, and these are the calculations that we have done. So again, for us, it's about learning process. It's not about the money per se. It's about starting to have the skills within our societal, let's say, ecosystem. So local, regional authorities, business communities, citizens, young people, youth organizations, civil society organizations that have to have a bigger role in the governance and in the of course have a more benefit in the upcoming instruments. For us, it's about learning, and of course, it's not about having full access, because we would not be able to absorb, of course, because we are not ready there.
Thank you, Krisela. Thomas, what do you suggest? Do we place too much expectation on cohesion seen from the Western Balkans, or would it really make a game changer, this process, if we achieve to include the Western Balkans from the very start? I mean, very soon, let's say.
I think it has the chance to be a game changer. It's not an automatism. So you have a wide selection of instruments, a wide selection of funding programs at hand. And basically, I would also say cohesion policy also serves as a network establisher. So it's not per se something which comes to you and automatically brings you to whatever basically dreams you have. But I think it's the toolbox you need to make the most out of it, to make the most out of governance structures, to connect to the rest of Europe, to improve social fabrics, and so on and so forth. So it's, in my opinion, it's the biggest potential you have to really move towards Europe. And really be part of Europe, a fully fledged and integrated part of Europe. And I think this is also something which can be done in a differentiated way, because it needs to be done in a differentiated way. Because if you don't have the structures in your regions, in your countries, you can't make use of these toolboxes. If you don't have the information with whom to collaborate, you can't improve your economic situation. If you don't know the people in Brussels, in your neighboring countries, you can't set up Interreg programs and things like that. So I think it definitely makes sense to apply and make at least parts of the toolbox accessible, because that's the key for European integration.
And where do you see the biggest of the obstacles to achieve this? Is it in the Western Balkans governments, or is rather at the EU level or member states level?
Difficult question. So in the cohesion policy context, we have the issue that we are facing regions in so-called development traps. So within the EU27, those are the regions which are not really moving forward. And the learnings out of this and the discussion goes around on how to improve the administrative structures, to improve institutions that cohesion policy may work. And I think the learnings and the discussion in this regard may also apply, at least to some respect, to the Western Balkans. Because I think from the European side, there's also a little bit skepticism about how well these institutions and governance structures are already established. So I think, regardless of what official numbers, figures, statistics in this regard show, I would say there may be some doubts. On the other side, so looking at the Western Balkan states, I would say in principle the structures are there. I mean, they have to be improved, and you always can improve. Everyone can improve, also in the EU27. But I think the starting points are there. I mean, you have Interreg programs already in place that proves that something is already is already going on. You have regional innovation valley participation in Montenegro, for example, that also proves that in principle the region is ready and can participate.
Can you give me more elements about these last examples you gave?
So the Interreg program is Krisela already talked about this corridor 8. So it's a collaboration across member states and countries, basically in order to evolve strategically, to plan, and maybe as a starting point come even together and talk about the issues which need to be resolved in the interest of everyone. The other thing, which is also an important element of cohesion policy, regional innovation values, this is about bringing together complementary technology capabilities, different inventors, different people from the innovation community, in order to really set up clusters, basically, to really move and push forward in specific technologies we need, and we need a critical mass for this. And as far as I know, Montenegro is participating in this initiative, and I think others can do as well, because it's about brain power, it's about the innovation capacity you definitely also have in other parts in the Western Balkans as well.
Fantastic. Krisela, how much awareness do we have at the level of governments in the region? You've been advocating, I guess, mostly at EU level, but are Western Balkan governments aware and willing to participate in concrete terms to make a difference, or are they rather an obstacle, as they often are, by creating constant tensions where it's not needed?
Before responding to this question, Luisa, I wanted just to add one more element, and I see colleagues from Serbian Ministry of European Integration that can eventually also provide more information. But I know, for example, that the region has been recently, I don't know if all the countries are from the region, but at least some have been recently made eligible under URBAC, which is another Interreg instrument which was not eligible, for example, for Western Balkan countries before. And it's about the thematic cooperation. It's another strand of Interreg which was not open for our countries. And this happened within, during financial perspective, so not in a new one. I mean, when there is will, when there is cooperation, when there is a good, let's say, synergies, I think things can be done and should not be looked at as impossible. This is another example maybe that can be eventually also explained by the other colleagues. To go back to your question, in 2000, last year, Albania held the presidency of the Berlin Process initiative, which is this intergovernmental initiative focused on regional cooperation. And before having the summit in Tirana, which was organized in October last year, our government undertook this tour in the region to discuss what kind of other instruments the region needs to address the development needs that we have. I mentioned in the very beginning, before actually the growth plan was launched, it was requested boldly and openly, and I know the governments have worked to also kind of prepare together, so to say, position in front of the Commission to actually advocate for convergence instrument, because with EPAT we don't have that kind of mindset. And then the growth plan came. It was within, during the financial perspective that we are in. So nothing like extraordinary or ex novo could be, let's say, built. So they used an existing experience, which is the Recovery and Resilience Facility on the member state, to build up and to mirror this growth plan that we have now. This to illustrate that in the region there is awareness, there is let's say, constantly a desire to work beyond the current, let's say, toolbox that we have at disposal, to look for better instruments. I'm not talking about the financial, let's say, size of those instruments, because this is another matter that has to be, of course, negotiated with the Commission and the member states, but to work on the landscape of instruments that we have available, so as to learn from the previous mistakes that we have with different, let's say, IPA and different instruments that we have been having in 30 years, so to say, and produce better instruments. Okay, so this is there is such let's say need is already acknowledged in the region. Now it's always about the political will to implement the instrument. And also with HIPAA, if you have political will, you can implement better. Also with the growth plan, if you have political will, you can absorb the money. And we will see, of course, how it will work out. So the political will is extremely important, not just in the very beginning of negotiating an instrument, but also during the process. Because once you gain something, then you have to be up to the task and take the most out of it. So this is the logic. So I see it as a process which has to start, and it's now the window of opportunity that I mentioned in the beginning that should be used wisely to address the needs, which are not just our needs, development needs, but it's also EU needs. The needs that Thomas was mentioning in the very beginning, competitiveness, demographic issues are joined, are the same. We have, and Europe had, and European Union countries have. So we share the same struggles, the same challenges, the same problems. Of course, what you have is more instruments in place to support you to address those challenges. And what we have is less instruments and more, let's say, challenges when it comes to the flexibility of those instruments to address our development needs. Just to make a final example, I will finish here. Take the digital, let's say, sector. When you program with HIPAA, interventions in the digital sector, it's almost impossible. Why? Because it takes 3 years for an HIPAA project to be conceptualized and then to start being implemented. And you already have a change of the term of references when it comes to the technology that should be used. So when you talk to people working in the digital, let's say, sectors in our ministries, for example, they cannot handle anymore, so to say, the EU cycles, project cycles, because they are not fit for the context we are living in, and you need rapid changes also when it comes to this other side of the EU, so to say, on our regions to adapt to the rapidity of the changes and to the, of course, geopolitical context now.
I want to read out Sanda Simich's comment, but maybe if Sanda wants to intervene herself, she was called out. So Sanda, take the floor if you can. Otherwise, the comment is in the European Territorial Cooperation environment, the Western Balkan countries are actively participating in the post-27 consultation process. So Sanda, can you say a few words about that, or should we ask our speakers to comment? Maybe Thomas or Krisela want to say something about it.
I can, of course, if Sanda will not take the floor. Is she? No, she's not. Okay.
I don't know if it is our responsibility to unmute her, or she can do it herself.
It's true. The countries in the region are already working, and they are using several instruments like the macro-regional strategies, for example, also the Interreg program. They have launched their consultation phases to collect their, let's say, beneficiaries in their territories that they are covering, and collect as much as possible perspectives and insights and their, of course, wish when it comes to the next EU policy cycle. It's one part of the overall, let's say, process, and it's very important, of course, to provide all the available, let's say, programs and instruments we have in place, legitimacy to voice up then when it comes to, negotiating the different instruments to provide immediate legitimacy for the future instruments. And this is very important. It's already taking place, but this is just one part of the picture. We should also work our, let's say, stakeholders in our countries should work with their governments to formulate concrete proposals, because I think there is also a change in the dynamic of the relationship between the EU and the Western Balkans compared to like 5 years before. If before the region was waiting always proposal from the EU, now I think there is a different kind of momentum that also the EU is looking like for proposals coming from the region when it comes to the future instruments. So I think there is also this to be taken into account when advancing, of course, with the process.
Thomas, so the last comments is for you in the last few minutes we have left. Is there anything else you want to highlight in particular?
In general, maybe as a last statement, and I want really to highlight the issue that at the core of the European Union, there's the European single market. And the European single market is not beneficial at the same way for everyone. It's not the same benefit for every business. It's not the same benefit for every region. It's not the same benefit for every person. But, and this is great, it's a benefit for everyone in general. But this benefit is not equally distributed across Europe. This is what we see everywhere. This is what we experienced in the last enlargements as well. So I think it's really crucially important to have cohesion policy instruments to really combat and avoid huge disparities to arise. And this needs to be done in a proactive way, meaning that we have to think and start with it already now. Because if you are going now to the doctor as a prevention, it's always better than to go there for an intervention or even go to the emergency room. So I think everything you can do towards more cohesion, towards more single market must go in the same way. So more single market, more steps towards the European Union must also be accompanied with more cohesion policy instruments application.
Thank you. I've seen Jorge Nunez Ferrer showing up at the very last minute. So we have 6 minutes left, and we'll be very happy to hear you, Director of Cohesion and EU Budget at the Conference of Peripheral Maritime Regions. Jorge.
I'm really sorry. I had a calendar disaster, and I apologize. Disappeared from my calendar. It moved into different time. And then luckily I find out, but unfortunately too late to react. I had a different time on my calendar. Anyway, I'm calling. The point I was saying. I mean, we are speaking about enlargement. And there is an issue that has happened over the last years is that enlargement process of accession moved more and more. They changed the policy from something that was linked to regional policy and shifted more and more away from it. So you have the DG enlargement working on it. So you have a different procedure and budget and format and approach of financing create, and this is a concern in the sense that you need at a certain point to align the country and the regions and the procedures to the ones that will come, the future policy. You need to be joining the European Union, not to be joining the pre-accession program. This means that in a certain way the signals are out of line with the post-accession period. And this happened already in previous enlargement, but now it's even bigger, the gap, because when I was working on enlargement, and I was in the negotiation teams and so on, the enlargement process, pre-accession, post-accession was run by DG Regio, and a director of DG Regio was doing it. But even then, there were 2 separate directions, one for members and one for the pre-accession, but at least it was DG Regio. And there was the preparation for the next policy. Here, what I think is there is a dissonance. From the other side, we know the budget is going to probably come with, there will be several changes, and there may be changes also in governance procedures. So the moment now is better maybe to wait what's going to happen before we align to the wrong kind of policy. But it is very important, effectively, that the pre-accession process prepares really for members that join to enter and immediately you have a smooth transfer without a shock on who is responsible. In the past, you would have the Ministry of Finance found itself from one day to another that they are not running the funds anymore. It's a regional policy ministry, and the regional policy ministry was actually prepared in theory, not in practice. And the first year was very difficult in every enlargement. First 2 years. So my point I wanted to make, and a bit longer, not only in a couple of minutes, but the idea was that we need to really focus now into getting the right policy before accession. So if we say that the section is in 2030, it's already very short time. You would have to have 3 years that really align. So it means that in the next 2 years, we need to get the message through and also clarify what is the role of the regions, because now in pre-accession, it's all national. It's really national. And then you don't have the right you don't have in the country the right governance structure when the funds come that are distributed in a different way than the pre-accession funds. You have different beneficiaries, you have a different procedure. And I think that here people are not really paying attention to these things on the Brussels side, and that's what was my message. I wanted maybe one more detail.
We will find the opportunities to explore this in detail in the next, very soon in a new occasion. I take the very last minute before they cut us off
Yes.
to thank you, all of you, also for joining, for making this conversation so rich, and for all participants that have been here. The registration of our event will remain online for the years to come. So it will be for sure useful for other people interested in deepening this issue. And for sure, we will continue following it as Osservatorio Balcani Caucaso Transeuropa, together with our partner, Il Sole 24 Ore, that I thank for also supporting this webinar with us. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice time. Thank you.
Thank you, Luisa. Bye.